team believes that national security is a must priority for American civilians. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. Let's get right into this debate. U.S. will ban travelers from West Africa. Observation 1, resolution analysis. Subpoint A, we reserve the right to define the policy debate. The terms. We're going to define travelers as non-essential government personnel, and United States will be United States. Ban, it's going to be a 90-day ban period from West Africa, where West Africa is where the Ebola is currently happening from countries in Liberia and right around Liberia. Point C, the plan text. The United States is going to follow what a Democrat proposed for a 90-day travel ban on non-essential government from West Africa. And this will be also enforced by the 1944 Public Health Service Act, which gives federal government power to prevent transmission of diseases and viruses from foreign countries. So before these travelers can come back to America, they're going to have to be stationed in a quarantine station by the CDC before being granted access to come back to America. And subpoint D, criterion is going to be risk analysis. Observation 2, advantage 1, preventing spread of Ebola. All right, so subpoint A, the harms. Currently, over 6,000 cases of infections of Ebola have broken out in Africa, and this number isn't growing. This number isn't decreasing; it's growing as we speak. There has already been over 3,000 victims killed from Ebola, and we have seen this spread to foreign countries. We've seen that a first world country as Spain has already had over 4 infected victims in Spain. So we see that it has spread to Spain itself, and the victim itself had died from Ebola in Spain. We also seen that 5 Americans that came back from Africa have been infected with Ebola as well. So we see this has spread to 2 top-notch first world foreign countries. Subpoint B, inherency. By currently allowing travelers to travel back from West Africa, we're still allowing them to spread Ebola in America. So this is not going to be stopped until we take some initiative action. The subpoint C to this would be solvency. We're going to solve for this problem because we're going to stop and ban these travelers to coming back from in Ebola-affected countries, where they're going to have to be processed in the quarantine stations before they could come back so that we could keep America safe. And another solvency is that history has shown us that travel bans have been a good prevention of stopping spread of international diseases. We have examples of this from history's past. Subpoint C would be the impact. Due to our plan, we're going to see a decrease of a national security of Ebola to American citizens throughout the world, throughout the United States. We're going to see a decreased amount of United States Ebola victims being infected by Ebola. And because of this, we're going to increase the amount of preventions and stability and sustainability for our American citizens' lives, in which they will feel safe and secure. They're not going to be scared to see, oh, am I going to contract Ebola because we're just allowing all these travelers coming back from West Africa. It's going to increase the numbers of infected patients coming back to America, which is going to increase the numbers of people they infect. And yes, question.
Under your solvency, you said that there's a history of this working. Do you have any examples?
We have one from the black lung disease that happened. There was one from the black lung disease that from Europe, and they increased restrictions from like the 1900s, so that helped reduce people contracting black lung disease in America. And there's also many more from the past. Another thing about this is that we're going to see a decrease. We're going to see a decrease in American U.S. tax dollars being spent on Ebola victims from deaths and equipment and medical procedures. So we're going to see that this advantage brings us saving costs and saving lives and saving the spread of Ebola in America. Observation 3 will be advantage number 2, increasing resources to Africa. The harms is that right now there's only a limited amount of sources of ZMapp serum, and there's only such a limited supply. And we, as a government team, would like to use as much of this as we can in Africa. But another harm would be allowing Ebola victims to come back to America without them properly being examined in quarantine, we're going to allow them to spread Ebola in America, which is going to lead to us using more of this ZMapp serum on American patients instead of having it being sent to Africa. The subpoint B is going to be inherency. Will that be that as long as we allow people to come back from Liberia and these heavily contracted Ebola countries, we're going to see increase in more cases of people having Ebola coming back to America, and that's going to increase the amount of patients being spread, which is also going to increase the amount of CMAP serum that we're going to use in America instead of using it in Africa. Subpoint C would be the solvency. By us allowing us to control Ebola in Africa and preventing it to spread into America, this is going to solve for the amount of ZMapp serum that we will not have to use on American patients. So the subpoint D of this is that it's going to increase the amount of resources and money and medicine like the ZMapp serum to be able to be expedited in Africa instead of being used in America. And because of this, we're going to see a better control and prevention of Ebola in Africa as a result of this, because we're gonna allow America to spend more money and to spend more resources and medicine, and so that will benefit Africa greatly instead of it being split between now we gotta use resources on America first and then Africa second with whatever we have left over. And it just makes it easier all around because we're already trying to help out Africa. Like we sent 3,000 troops to help contain the spread in Africa. So now if it spreads in America, that's just going to be less help that we're allowed to give to these Africans that desperately need our help at 100%. And government team, I'm proud to propose.
That used to be my job.
It still is your job.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not for you. You know,
But now you get.
I used to like bat in front of Barry Bonds, and now I just have to some fucking random minor leaguer.
But he's got a lot of potential. Barry Bonds is old.
But now you get
Barry Bonds in his prime, Joe.
Okay.
Because clearly you are, and clearly you also use steroids.
Clearly.
Not everyone. Not everyone. Not everyone.
You wanna start?
Sorry.
Hello, thank you all for coming today. Sounds like we have a great topic to discuss, so I'm just going to get right into it. As the government stated, the U.S. will ban travelers from West Africa. As their terms, subpoint A defined, they define this as non-essential government members. I don't know how to run the topicality, but I'm just going to mention the topicality, and hopefully my partner can do something with that. All right, you guys said a 90-day ban, just to clarify, and in quarantine areas. And point 2, preventing Ebola. The government team stated some current facts of 6,000 cases of infected people in Africa and 3,000 killed so far. We, the opposition, acknowledge that this is a drastic problem and it needs our attention, and we propose a counter plan over their proposed resolution. And our counter plan involves the CDC sending 200 doctors or medical personnel to help in the Ebola virus outbreak, and we believe this is the better solution than banning all travel to West Africa because um, one moment, I gotta get on track first before I can answer anything. Banning all flights will be a dramatic shock to the citizens of this country, fear mongering and getting uh, unnecessary fear to the general population. We believe Ebola should be acted upon, and our counter plan involves sending specialists over to the infected areas, um, the most isolated areas such as Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. They're the most at risk for this current virus, and we believe, if anything, I don't know, I'm so off track today. I apologize, everyone. Okay, the government claims inherency, and it won't be stopped unless we stop travelers from West Africa. The CDC is the best well-trained people to fight this, and they said the best place to fight this virus is on its home turf in West Africa, and if we ban other people than non-government personnel, that'll restrict the fight on Ebola, restricting the, the the church groups and the donators and the individual contributors to this. And you stated in the past, and you brought up some diseases that weren't as severe. MERS, for instance, was a much more contagious disease, and they didn't outright ban it as you proposed. And they did put some restrictions, but nothing as dramatic as the proposed resolution of banning. Yes?
How many people did MERS infect and or kill?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. So, observation, point A on the government's on case. They said this will increase sources in Africa. This ban will restrict and eliminate sources in Africa by only allowing government personnel. By doing this, this will not help the fight against Ebola. It will actually hurt the fight on Ebola. The solvency, subpoint C, was ZMAP. Government groups are not the only people distributing ZMAP. And again, if you only allow the government groups over to West Africa, this will restrict on the distribution of ZMAP, and this will be a harm. And so let me just restate before I finish up. Ebola can only be contracted by direct contact, and so that includes saliva, feces, and urine and blood. So an outright ban of the general population is a dramatic plan, and it's just fear-mongering, and our counter plan will help, and it won't have as many disadvantages. And yes?
Well, providing national security, would you consider that being dramatic?
Not at all. But the proposed plan is banning all non-government personnel. So this is, as I said, the CDC has posted repeatedly that the best place to fight this disease is on Africa's ground, and they your proposed plan restricts help to the African population. And just one last final note that the incubation period of Ebola is 21 days. So, yeah, I forgot what I was going to say about that. I apologize. I'm not going to answer your question.
You have 2 minutes left. Go on.
I know. But I didn't really do anything with the first 6 anyways.
I was gonna help you out.
No, you weren't. My bad. I didn't even know what I was trying to run.
Maybe you've seen the movie 28 Days Later, or 28 Weeks Later, or 28 Months Later. But the fact of the matter is that when a disease starts spreading and it hits home, it is very, very difficult to stop. This is why, as the government team, we're putting the security and the public safety of our citizens at the forefront of our agenda. So I'm going to go off case first, and I'm going to address the T and the counter plan, and then I'm going to get to our case. So first, they had a topicality argument, and Chris brought it up, and credit to him for at least bringing it up, and I know we haven't gone over topicality exactly, but here are my 4 basic responses. First, there's no counter definition, so I don't know what word or phrase they think that we're misdefining. Next, there's no violation, so I don't know like what the difference is between like what they think is a more preferable definition to what word or phrase. There's no standards, there's no reason they give for like why their interpretation is better, and there's no voters. So, Judge, you can just dismiss this topicality right off the bat. Their counterplan now is that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, will send 200 medical, is it 200 or 2,000? 200? We'll send 200 medical personnel to help fight the disease on the ground in West Africa. My first response is PERM. We can do both. We can ban travelers from West Africa, as well as have the CDC send 200 medical personnel to help in West Africa. There's a different agent. We're using what would be, I suppose, the FAA or another normal means agent, whereas you guys are using the CDC, entirely different agents. They don't function from the same resource well. Doctors, are not interested, are not spending their time on flights. They're just completely different. So we can do both. We can ban flights from West Africa as well as send 200 personnel from the CDC, and there's no reason that we can't. Here's a disadvantage to just adopting their counterplan. So the PERM will avoid this disadvantage, but the disadvantage to just adopting their counterplan is taglined, Ebola comes to the U.S. The A point is that already multiple individuals have come back from West Africa infected with the deadly disease of Ebola. The B point is that their counterplan does nothing to stop this, so we can only see that it will continue as it has with the recent trends. The internal links are that more people than infected people come from West Africa into the United States, then the disease spreads, and the impact is that you have a spread of Ebola, an Ebola epidemic, or at this point it would become a pandemic as it reaches across the world into the U.S. So if we just send personnel to Africa, we're not stopping the disease from coming here. And when they say that the best place, an expert, somebody said the best place to fight Ebola is on the ground, we absolutely agree. But that's why our PERM gets those advantages, but also our advantage to tagline resources to West Africa, which is literally about how we'll be able to fight this in West Africa if we are able to stay free of it in our own country. So now I'm going to get to case. So I'll talk first about our advantage 1. We're talking about preventing Ebola in the U.S. It's important that we realize the difference between fear-mongering and the difference between actual rational reasoning and wanting to be safe. So already when Lasai talks about the harm scenarios, 4 people in Spain have been affected. That's a first world country. So now we're not talking about the infrastructure in West Africa can't hold up and that's why it's spreading. It's happening in Spain. 1 has already died in Spain. Add to that about 6,000 infected in West Africa and 3,000 killed. But I think what shows that this is really serious, and I'll get to you after this third harm, is that even in West Africa, they've had to stop shaking hands at business meetings. Even those in the higher up socioeconomic realize that this thing can spread, and so instead of shaking hands, now they're forced to do little elbow bumps because they know that this disease is harmful and can spread quite easily. Yes, your question?
Do we currently have any infectious diseases in the United States that kill more than 1 person?
Yeah, we might, but we're just worried about stopping Ebola. That's the context of the resolution. So now you can extend our impacts across here because there are no responses to either our inherency or our harms on our Advantage 1. So the first impact basically is there is no more Ebola in the U.S., and that we save money and resources by doing that because we don't have to treat it here. So all of the money that we would have had to spend treating it, we no longer have to. And then the third impact is that, as like Lasai brought up, history shows that travel bans work. That you can't say that even amidst a travel ban, that an infectious disease still gets in and spreads. So Lasai talks about, right, how like there was black lung going on in Europe from in the early 1900s, sort of the industrialism that was going on, and there were no regulations, and people are getting black lung. And that's why it was important that we had a travel ban imposed. But it's also important to realize the higher population density in the U.S. than in West Africa. So because of the higher population density in the U.S., it means that once 1 person gets it here and is out in the open, it's a lot more likely to spread here. Next, let's talk about our Advantage 2 of resources to West Africa. So this is where we say, we have to keep ourselves safe first and foremost, but we agree that it's really important to fight this disease overseas in West Africa. So we talk about like the supply of ZMapp, the experimental serum being used to treat Ebola, is in really short supply, and it was created in the U.S., and it's a small U.S. company that has created it. And with the help of the CDC, it's been able to distribute that. But the supply is running low. And if we were to have an Ebola outbreak here, we would only be able to use ZMapp here, and Ebola would run rampant in West Africa. By not having Ebola here, we're allowed to use our ZMapp supplies elsewhere in West Africa and stop the disease on the ground there. So I have one response to our inherency, sort of the B point here, where Chris says, governments are not the only one distributing the ZMapp drug. I would say at this point, yes, they are. A, because it's experimental, and B, the CDC has been the only organization that has distributed ZMapp, and the CDC is a government organization. So now let's look at the impacts here and just extend them right across. The first one is that we treat the core on the ground of Ebola, so we don't allow it to spread rampantly there because we're able to take our resources over there and treat it in West Africa. Secondly, we stop the spread in the U.S. as well as in West Africa. Finally, we save lives. If we have ZMapp in West Africa and can treat individuals there, then we can hope to save the 3,000 lives of the individuals who are currently infected with Ebola in West Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here for this very, very important debate. Thank you to my opponents for offering up some information and talk about Ebola. First of all, I think everyone here can agree Ebola is a problem, whether it's American lives or it's African lives. We as the opposition feel like all lives are equally valuable. So a life is a life, no matter where it is. I'm going to start off and address the topicality, which we'll concede wasn't well run, but we're going to try and stretch this out a little bit. So our topicality would be on the word travelers. And our counter to definition is that travelers should include everybody. Now, the excuse me, the standard here is that when you think of a traveler, you don't think of something that's less inclusive than everybody. So the grounds here is that our grounds have been taken. We should have the right to have the grounds that if they're going to ban travelers, not that they're going to ban some travelers, that's our grounds. We should be able to limit which travelers are banned. They need to ban everybody. So by giving their working definition, what they do is they steal our grounds where we can't now work with medical personnel, we can't work with essentials. They've now framed this debate all in one way, so we have no grounds to argue. This becomes very, very essential when you look at our counter plan. So this is also an a priori issue. By skewing the grounds, you need to vote on that first, and by voting for that first, that means you have to vote an opposition ballot. Now, getting onto the counter plan and discussing the perm. Our number one problem here relates back to the topicality issue. We want to send 200 medical personnel over to fight this directly in Africa. Now, this is important because the director of the CDC has said the number one way to combat Ebola is to fight it on the ground in Africa. Herein lies the problem. If you ignore the topicality, then they try to take a perm. But if you don't allow the perm and you allow our topicality to stand, they can't perm it because they can't get those medical personnel back any longer. Because we now send medical personnel over, so they want to have these people come over but not allow them to come back. So now you're in a double bind. You either need to vote on the topicality, or you can ignore the topicality and you have to now vote for the counter plan, and you have to prefer the counter plan. So, Judge, I'll let you decide which way you want to vote for us. But either way, you got to start off on a priori and give us the topicality. Or if they want to concede the topicality, you now have to allow our counter plan, and our counter plan is preferential. Now, I asked them if there was other infectious diseases in the U.S. And again, we've all agreed Ebola is a problem right now. Ebola has killed, to my knowledge, one person in the U.S. There may be a few other cases that have happened today that I'm not exactly sure of. I think we're talking about less than 10 cases in the U.S. The director of the CDC has stated that the number one risk to U.S. travelers worldwide, to U.S. travelers that come back into the country, is influenza. Influenza kills 23,000 Americans a year, just in the U.S. Yet we've never created a travel ban on this. If there was a pandemic of influenza in the U.S., it would cost up to $150 billion to rid it. Now, this is important because this is a far greater effect on U.S. citizens, and focusing on U.S. citizens right now because that's where they started off, is that we want to protect them, we want to protect security. Yet we don't take this drastic measure with something that's already killing 23,000 Americans every year, yet we want to take this drastic measure for something that to this point has killed one American, 3,000 people in Africa. Now let's talk about a couple of their things. They talk about that this has worked in the past, and they give you the example of the black lung in the 1900s. Well, Judge, I would urge you to consider that this is not the 1900s anymore. Not only are travel bans different than they would have been back then, we also have far greater resources for combating diseases. The travel ban is not the reason that this works or does not work. It's the ability to fight infectious disease. Now, other thing is they talked about that by doing this, I believe it's under their solvency and observation too, that it's going to save dollars. Well, you can turn all that. If no one's coming in from Africa, there's no dollars being spent in the U.S. So any money being saved to fight diseases is now not being spent in. So now all these tourist areas don't have people coming in, don't have money at hotels. This is also going to lead to people losing jobs. When people lose jobs, it now puts more of a strain on the U.S. economy. When it puts more of a strain on the U.S. economy, we now have to go to like entitlement programs such as welfare for these people to survive. So in fact, by banning these people, it's actually not going to save us money. It's going to cost us more money in the long run. Now, they also talked about the high population density in the U.S., and we would agree. The U.S. definitely has a higher population density than Africa. But again, once again, we also have a higher capacity to fight disease in the U.S. We have the ability to fight disease. Just because something spreads to 3,000 cases in Africa does not mean it's going to spread to 3,000 cases in the U.S. Completely different countries, completely different standards, completely different infrastructures. Because of this, you can't assume both things are going to happen in the same place. Yes, sir.
To the turn on the money hurting our economy, what's the magnitude of that affecting our economy?
I will get to that in 1 second. So let's talk about criteria. Criteria was risk analysis. We agree with this criteria. The risk analysis right now is one individual in the U.S., the possibility of it spreading to a few more individuals. Now, again, risk analysis is we've offered up that 23,000 Americans die from influenza, yet we don't take this kind of step there. So there is no doubt that by banning stuff, by banning travelers from Africa, there's no doubt that less money will be spent. I'll get to you in one moment. That less money will be spent, that less money will be spent on coming in, as far as more money that we're going to have to contribute now because of loss of jobs, loss of wages, loss of sales tax, loss of income tax, and such. So I would say the magnitude of that is far greater when we look at the case of Ebola, where we have it currently one solid 10 cases, one deadly case. Yes, sir.
Is there a known location of where the influenza virus originates from?
There is not an actually known location. This is, again, infectious diseases in and of itself, and that's a great point you bring up, which is why who is best at fighting in these type of diseases? The CDC. The CDC understands how to go in, and they're great at what's called trace rooting the disease, which is they're able to go back and find where the actual disease started. The best agency in the world at doing this is the CDC. So once again, that's why you should prefer our plan to send members of the CDC to Africa, where they even agree, they've already conceded that the best place to fight this is on the ground. So why not fight this on the ground with the best possible personnel? Now let's also consider the fact that if we isolate these countries in West Africa, they now have no ability to have other doctors come in to help fight this area. If the U.S. bans something, what are other countries going to look at? They're going to say, well, if the U.S. is doing it, we ought to ban it too. If everyone starts banning it, then we have no ability to get people into the country to help fight the disease, because other countries in Europe, our allies, they're going to take the same approach as us and say, well, we should ban them as well. So once again, I think based on the topicality argument, as well as our opposition to the PERM and the counter plan, that you should vote a negative ballot. Thank you. One voters, why we're winning.
No, I think pointless for me to go right now because I don't know. Just not here today. Hello, Judge. No, I didn't have much to say last time, but I'm back up here again. I'd like to thank my partner for running such a compelling argument based on my non-compelling statements that I threw out there randomly. So, I'm going to say why we should be voted for, and I'll throw out a couple of voters, and then say some non-voters for the other team. You should vote for us because the drastic measures proposed by the government will not help or not offer solvency, but it will actually harm more than it will do good. As my partner said, the financial situation will put struggle on the economy of this country, and restricting help from outside forces will not help the fight on Ebola, but actually hinder. And the proposed plan will not help Ebola because it's banning travel to the ground, the fighting ground that needs to be the front line of this battle. And we are for saving lives, and we are for stopping Ebola. And that is first and foremost to the opposition team. And we believe that you should vote for us because the topicality, as my partner said, topicality is one of our voters. And as if you weigh out the counter plan and the other, the U.S.'s plan, you have to give us the votes because our plan is the only reasonable and acceptable measure to be taken. And do not vote for the government because it will cause more harms and shock to this country, and it will not stop Ebola. It will not do it. Thank you very much.
guys ready? Oh, that's ready. All right, so just a roadmap before I start. I'm going to start on T, then counterplan, then some arguments they brought up, new arguments. Not as in like bad, but just arguments that we haven't got a chance to respond to, so I'll respond to those first. And then I'm going to talk about why we won this debate. All right, everyone ready? 3, 2, 1. All right, so starting on their topicality arguments, I have plenty of responses. My first response is that we're the government team. We reserve the right to define. Response number 2 is that alternative interpretation is not better interpretation. My response number 3 is that it's not the opposition's job to provide definitions. It's the government's job to provide definitions. And you do not vote on opposition's definitions because you firmly believe it's better. You should only vote for opposition's definition if they can prove that affirmative is being abusive and unfair. So you don't vote for the better definition. You always vote at if they provide a fair and debatable definition, and I'm going to provide you the reasons why ours is debatable. So to the violation, there wasn't really a clear label of violation, but my response to that is, one, we meet their interpretation because we are banning travelers in general. We're banning all travelers, so that grants them access to all these travelers in which they provided in their not disadvantages, but their responses, like how that we're going to lose money from these people not being able to spend money in America. So we see they do have grounds. And my second response is that we meet the interpretation because when travelers go to Africa, travelers go to Africa to travel. When CDC goes to Africa, they're not going to travel. They're going for essential government medical expenditures. So we see that these CDCs aren't going to travel. They're going for business. And so they're more going for government essential whatever, blah, blah, blah. So they're not really traveling. So we see how we're still being fair with our interpretation. Through their grounds, they don't lose grounds because they still have all the grounds of the travelers like they already used. And they could have had more arguments like system shock of these people that have jobs, went on vacation, can't come back, lose their jobs. So that's some arguments they could have made. So I'm showing you additional arguments that they could have made. So they even have more ground that they had, just that they didn't really evaluate all the possibilities. Also, a voter, this is not a voter issue because you don't vote for the best interpretation, you just vote for having a fair interpretation. Our interpretation was fair for all the reasons I provided above. And even if we do lose this argument, which I strongly believe we won, we're going to show you why we still win this debate. So when you go into the counterplan, they say we can't turn, but we can turn because we could physically put a 90-day ban and we could send CDC to Africa because we showed you that there are essential government personnel and not just travelers. And if you, for whatever reason, you vote for their topicality, you can see we can still perm because for the reasons that if we send CDC to Africa, max days, the CDC doctors could come back in 90 days. They never address our 90-day ban. That's an important thing. It's only a 90-day ban. They can come back after 90 days. And also we said that they could get themselves through the quarantine in the foreign countries and their CDC. They could fast-track themselves because they're CDC doctors. They're going to fast-track themselves and fast-track this process.
Yeah. Oh, wait. I don't have to do that.
The ability to fast track themselves and change the plan or the amount of time is a completely brand new argument.
My response is that the 90-day was brought up in our plan text from observation 1. The fast track is the response to the new arguments brought up in which Joe had no way to respond to that. So I'm just responding to their arguments about how that these doctors, Tom brought up these doctors are going to go there and they won't be able to come back. And this is my chance to fully explain that these doctors can come back after 90 days and they can fast track themselves because we did say in our plan that they could come back after being in quarantine screenings in the foreign countries.
Point under consideration.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back to this. So we do see that max 90 days they come back doctors, and they're doctors from CDC, so they can fast track themselves. So we could physically, with topicality or with no topicality, we could do both plans no matter what. So you can't vote for them. You're going to vote for opposition. Or you're going to vote for affirmative. And so now to their arguments, I already went over how they say it's going to be a dramatic harm to your economy, but my first response is that it's low magnitude because really how much money are we going to lose from the certain amount of travelers that are currently in West Africa, and how much were they going to spend in that only 90-day period? And it could also be less than 90-day periods, like how we said, after they're screened at the quarantines of these foreign countries, after being cleared, they could come back. So we're not going to see that much money loss, and they never brought any actual money and how this is actually going to affect loss of money. So we see it's very low magnitude. And so, yeah, it's only 90 days, and they can come back to the screening. And so, some voters on reasons why we won this debate. Our voter number one is. All right, so voter number one is that we're solving to increase national security in America by preventing the spread of Ebola in America by allowing us to put a 90-day ban from travelers, non-essential travelers in West Africa, and forcing them to be properly quarantined and screened before allowing them to come back to America. So we see that all our advantages from our first bans could be flown across because the only response was a turn on the money, but we showed you how this is very low magnitude and how our impacts of saving the spread of Ebola outweighs the just small amount of money that if we do lose will be lost. And our advantage too was never really touched upon about how we're going to increase resources to Africa. So you can pull all the impacts that we have of decreasing Ebola in Africa, increasing the amount of ZMAP serum used in Africa. So you see that we get all our access to our first and second advantage, and we get access completely to their counterplan with or without the permits for all the following reasons I provided. And there was no disadvantage to our plan. So I don't see why you wouldn't want to vote for our plan and increase national security of America. Thank you.